I'd found the letter on a Tuesday in March, wedged between the pages of a water-damaged copy of East of Eden that had been sitting in a box in my garage for 7 years. I wasn't looking for it. I wasn't looking for anything really, except maybe a reason to avoid the estate planning documents my lawyer had sent over, the ones that forced me to contemplate my own mortality in triplicate. The box had survived 3 moves: Seattle to Portland, Portland to Eugene. Eugene back to Portland again. Each time I'd labeled it Dad's books in black marker and stacked it with the other remnants of his life that I couldn't bear to sort through, but couldn't quite throw away either. Clothes had gone to Goodwill within a month of his death. Furniture had been sold or distributed among family. But the books had followed me, a paper monument to unfinished business. The letter fell out when I lifted the Steinbeck, floating to the concrete floor like a dried leaf. The envelope was cream-colored, slightly yellowed, addressed to me in my father's distinctive slanted handwriting. Walter James Hartley. No address, no stamp. He'd never mailed it. The postmark in the corner read September 14th, 2011, 2 weeks before he died, 14 years ago. I stood there in the garage, surrounded by boxes of Christmas decorations and camping equipment I'd last used when my kids were young, and stared at that envelope like it might detonate. My hands were shaking. At 63 years old, I thought I'd moved past the particular grief that comes with losing a parent. I thought I'd made my peace with everything left unsaid between us. But here it was, evidence of words spoken too late, or maybe words I'd been too careless to discover. I didn't open it right away. Instead, I carried it inside, set it on the kitchen counter, and made coffee. Then I sat at the table and looked at it for 20 minutes, the way you might study a snake to determine if it's venomous. My father had been dead for 14 years. What could he possibly have written that would matter now? Everything, as it turned out. My father's name was Thomas Hartley. Though everyone called him Tom, he was a civil engineer who designed bridges, not the grand architectural marvels that make it into coffee table books, but the sturdy, functional spans that carry traffic over rivers and ravines in small towns across the Pacific Northwest. He was proud of his work in the way that practical men are proud of practical things. His bridges held. They lasted. They did what they were designed to do. He approached fatherhood the same way. He provided. He protected. He showed up to school plays and soccer games, paid for college, helped with down payments. He was reliable in the way a well-built bridge is reliable. Steady, solid, always there when you needed to cross from one side to the other. But he wasn't warm, wasn't demonstrative. Emotions in my father's world were like water pooling on a foundation, something to be channeled away, redirected, kept from compromising the structure. He'd grown up in rural Montana in the 1940s, the son of a copper miner who'd believed that affection made boys soft. My father had absorbed that lesson completely, then passed it along to me with the same unconscious efficiency that he'd inherited his father's bent nose and his inability to carry a tune. We loved each other, my father and I. I never doubted that. But we loved each other the way two men might admire each other's craftsmanship from a distance, nodding in approval without ever touching the work with our hands. The last time I saw him was in the hospital, 3 days before he died. Pancreatic cancer, diagnosed too late for anything but pain management and platitudes. He was 71 years old and looked 90. His body consumed from the inside out. I'd driven up from Eugene, where I was living then, walked into that sterile room with its beeping machines and medicinal smell, and stood at the foot of his bed, unsure of what to say. "You made it," he'd said, his voice a rasp. "Of course. Traffic okay?" "Fine. A little slow through Salem." We'd talked for an hour about nothing. Traffic patterns, the nurses' efficiency, whether the Seahawks had a shot at the playoffs. Safe topics, manageable terrain. When I stood to leave, I'd squeezed his shoulder, the same gesture I'd use with a colleague or a casual acquaintance. "I'll be back tomorrow," I'd said. He'd nodded. "Drive safe." I never made it back. He died that night, quietly, while I was asleep in my hotel room 6 miles away. My mother called at 2:17 a.m., and I drove back to the hospital in the dark, arriving to find him already gone, his body still warm but emptied of whatever made him him. I'd stood beside the bed, looking at his face, finally peaceful after weeks of pain, and felt the crushing weight of all the things we'd never said. "I love you. I'm proud of you. I'm sorry. Thank you." The simple, essential words that should flow easily between fathers and sons, but somehow never do, caught in the narrow passages of masculine stoicism. At the funeral, I delivered a eulogy full of facts and accomplishments. I'd talked about his bridges, his 43-year marriage to my mother, his service in Vietnam. I'd made people laugh with a story about him trying to teach me to fish and spending more time untangling my line than casting his own. I'd made it through the whole service dry-eyed and composed, a model of controlled grief. But I'd never said goodbye. Not really. And for 14 years, that had been the weight I carried, the knowledge that we'd wasted our last conversation talking about traffic. The envelope sat on my kitchen counter for 3 days. I'd walk past it, notice it, keep walking. I'd pick it up, turn it over, set it back down. My wife Emma asked about it once. "What's that?" "A letter from my dad." "I didn't know you kept letters." "I didn't know I had it." She looked at me with that particular expression she'd perfected over 34 years of marriage. The one that said she understood more than I was saying. "Are you going to read it?" "Eventually. Walter." "I know, I will. I need to be ready." She kissed my cheek and left me alone with my cowardice. The truth was, I was terrified, not of what the letter might say exactly, but of what it might require of me. 14 years is a long time. I'd built a life in that time, achieved a kind of equilibrium. I'd learned to live with my regrets about my father, to file them away in that mental compartment where we keep the things we can't change. Opening that letter felt like reopening a wound that had finally scarred over. But on Friday evening, after Emma had gone to book club, and the house was quiet except for the rain against the windows, I poured myself 2 fingers of whiskey, sat down at the kitchen table, and carefully slid my finger under the envelope's flap. The paper inside was thick, cream-colored like the envelope, covered in my father's handwriting. The letter was dated September 14th, 2011, and it began without preamble. "Walter, I'm writing this at 3 a.m. because I can't sleep and because the morphine makes me honest in a way I've never been good at when sober. The doctors tell me I have weeks, maybe days. Your mother thinks I'm resting. Instead, I'm trying to figure out how to say things I should have said 49 years ago when you were born, or 25 years ago when you got married, or last Tuesday when you sat at the foot of my bed and we talked about traffic like 2 strangers waiting for the same bus. I've never been good with words, son. I'm a numbers man, an engineer. Give me a load calculation or a stress analysis and I'm fine. But feelings? I've spent my whole life treating feelings like structural deficiencies. Something to shore up and hide, rather than acknowledge and address. But I'm dying. And I'm discovering that all the things I never said weigh more than any bridge I ever built." I had to stop reading. My hands were shaking so badly the paper rattled. I set it down, drank the whiskey in one burning swallow, and let the tears come. The tears I hadn't cried at his funeral, hadn't cried in all the years since. They came with a violence that surprised me, great heaving sobs that seemed to originate somewhere deeper than my lungs. Emma found me like that when she came home, hunched over the kitchen table, the letter clutched in my hands. She didn't ask questions. She just held me while I cried, the way she'd held me through every crisis of our marriage, steady and certain and kind. When I could breathe again, I picked up the letter and kept reading. You need to know that I'm proud of you, Walter. Desperately proud. You became everything I hoped you would be. A good man, a good husband, a good father. You're kinder than I ever was, more patient, more present. You learn from my mistakes, even though I never had the courage to admit I was making them. Watching you with your own kids has been one of the great joys of my life. The way you listen to them, really listen. The way you're not afraid to say, I love you, like it's the most natural thing in the world. The way you hug them, long and tight, like you're trying to press those words into their bones so they'll never forget them. I never hugged you like that. I told myself it was because my father never hugged me, because men of my generation didn't do that sort of thing, because I was showing love through actions rather than words. All of that is true. All of that is also bullshit. The truth is, I was scared. Scared that if I showed you how much I loved you, how proud I was, how much joy you brought into my life, I'd somehow be making you vulnerable, making both of us vulnerable. My father taught me that love was a weakness, that showing emotion was the same as showing your throat to a predator. And even though I knew, intellectually, that he was wrong, that his cold, distant approach had damaged me in ways I spent my whole life trying to repair, I couldn't break free of it. So I held back. I stayed silent. I let you grow up thinking that my approval was contingent, that my love had to be earned through achievement, rather than given freely, just because you existed. I'm so sorry for that, son. I'm sorry for every time you looked at me, hoping for affection, and got a nod of approval instead. I'm sorry for every accomplishment I acknowledged with good job, when what I meant was you amaze me. I'm sorry for making you believe that stoicism was strength, when really, it was just fear wearing a different face. The letter went on for 3 more pages. My father wrote about specific memories, teaching me to ride a bike and being so worried I'd fall that I couldn't enjoy watching me succeed, dropping me off at college and driving away before the tears came because I might see them, walking me down the aisle at my wedding and wanting to tell me how proud I'd made him, but settling for a handshake instead. He wrote about his own father, my grandfather Samuel, who'd grown up in Depression-era poverty and learned to equate survival with emotional shutdown, about how trauma gets passed down through generations like genetic material, invisible but powerful. I'm not making excuses, he wrote. Understanding where something comes from doesn't absolve us of responsibility for perpetuating it. I had a choice, every single day, to be different than my father was. Sometimes I made that choice. Most of the time I didn't. But you broke the cycle. You became the father I should have been. And maybe that's the best thing I ever did, even if I did it by accident. Maybe my failures gave you a template for what not to do, and you were brave enough to do the opposite. The letter ended with this. I'm writing this at 3:47 a.m. The sun will be up soon. Your mother will wake up and find me here, and she'll scold me for not resting, and I'll let her fuss over me, because that's our dance, and we've been doing it for 43 years. I'm going to hide this letter in the Steinbeck. You told me once it was your favorite book, back when you were in college, and still believed you might become a writer instead of a lawyer. I don't know if you still read it, or if you even have it anymore. But if you find this letter, whether it's next week or next decade, I want you to know, I love you. I have always loved you. You are my greatest achievement, my proudest accomplishment, the best thing I ever built, not because of what you've done or who you've become, but simply because you're you, because you existed in the world and made it better just by being in it. I'm sorry I never said that when it could have made a difference. I hope you can forgive me. I hope more than anything that you'll be kinder to yourself than I was to myself, that you'll let yourself feel things, express things, need things, that you'll tell the people you love that you love them as often as you can, in as many ways as you can think of. Don't make my mistakes, son. Don't wait until it's too late. With more love than I knew how to show, Dad, I read the letter 3 times that night, then once more in the morning with coffee and clearer eyes. Each reading revealed new layers, new meanings. The handwriting got shakier toward the end. I could see where the morphine and exhaustion had taken hold. There were crossed-out words, phrases rewritten. In the margins, he doodled the way he always did when he was thinking. Small, precise sketches of bridge supports and suspension cables. Emma read it too, after I asked her to. She cried, which surprised me, because she'd never been particularly close to my father. But she cried for me, for him, for all the complicated ways that love gets tangled up in fear and pride and generational trauma. "Are you okay?" she asked when she finished. "I don't know. I feel like I'm grieving him all over again, but differently." "How so?" I thought about it. When he died, I grieved what we never had. Now I'm grieving what we almost had. What we could have had if he'd been able to say these things before. But he did say them. 14 years too late. Better late than never? I wanted to believe that. But I couldn't shake the anger that was building alongside the grief. Why had he hidden the letter instead of giving it to me? Why had he written these words at 3 a.m. and then spent our last conversation together talking about traffic? If the morphine had made him honest, why hadn't he used that honesty in person instead of on paper? I carried those questions with me for days. They disrupted my sleep, intruded into conversations, colored everything I looked at. I found myself replaying memories, reinterpreting them through the lens of what I now knew. That time he'd stood in the doorway of my childhood bedroom, watching me build a model airplane, saying nothing but staying there for 20 minutes. Was that love he couldn't articulate? The way he'd grip my shoulder, quick and firm, whenever I achieved something, was that the closest he could come to an embrace? I called my sister Rebecca in California. She was 5 years younger, had always been closer to Dad in some indefinable way. "He wrote me a letter," I said. "Before he died. I just found it." A sharp intake of breath. "What?" I told her about the letter, read her excerpts. She was quiet for a long time. "He wrote me one too," she finally said. "I found it in a book he'd given me, maybe a year after he died. I never told you because, I don't know, it felt private, sacred." "What did it say?" "Similar things. How proud he was. How sorry he was for being so emotionally unavailable. How he hoped I'd be braver than he was about showing love." She paused. I was angry for a long time. Angry that he could write all of this, but couldn't say it to our faces. But eventually I realized this was the best he could do. This was him trying, in the only way he knew how. After we hung up, I went back to the garage and found the box of my father's books. I went through each one carefully, wondering if there were more letters hidden between pages. There weren't. Just margin notes in his handwriting, underlined passages, the occasional pressed flower or receipt marking a place he'd stopped reading. But I found other things. In a collection of Mary Oliver poems, he'd underlined this: "Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life?" In the margins, he'd written, "I wasted too much of mine." In a water-damaged copy of The Road, he'd marked this passage. He knew only that the child was his warrant. He said, "If he is not the word of God, God never spoke." Beside it, yes, in Letters to a Young Poet, he'd starred this line: "Perhaps all the dragons in our lives are princesses who are only waiting to see us act, just once, with beauty and courage." He'd been reading these books, underlining these passages, having conversations with himself, on paper that he could never have out loud. The books were full of the inner life he'd never shown me. The tender, searching, uncertain man hiding beneath the engineer's pragmatism. I thought I'd known my father. I'd thought I understood him. But here was evidence of a richness and depth I'd never suspected. A whole interior world he'd kept locked away. I started going to therapy. At 63, I figured it was better late than never. The same philosophy I was trying to apply to my father's letter. My therapist, a patient woman named Dr. Chen, who reminded me vaguely of Emma, listened to me talk about the letter, the books. The weight of discovering your parent was more complicated than you'd understood. What's the hardest part? She asked during our third session. I think it's knowing that we wasted all that time, that we could have had this connection, this understanding, but we were both too scared or proud or damaged to reach for it. Could you have, though? Could you have had that connection before you found the letter? I sat with the question. Maybe not. I was different then. I'm not sure I would have been ready to hear what he was saying, to really hear it. And now I understand. Now I see how my relationship with him shaped my relationships with everyone else. How his emotional unavailability taught me to be hypervigilant about my own emotions, to overcorrect by being too available, too present, sometimes to the point of smothering. I thought about my kids, now adults with their own lives. I tried so hard not to be like him that I sometimes forgot to just be myself. Dr. Chen nodded. Healing generational trauma isn't about not making mistakes. It's about making different mistakes. Better mistakes. Making different mistakes. Better mistakes. Over the following months, I found myself thinking differently about my father. Not just about who he'd been, but about who I'd been in relation to him. I'd spent so much of my life defining myself in opposition to him. The warm father, because he'd been cold. The expressive man, because he'd been stoic. But in doing that, I'd never quite figured out who I was, independent of that reactive stance. The letter forced me to see him not as a template to rebel against, but as a whole, flawed, struggling human being who'd done his best with the tools he'd been given. It forced me to extend to him the same compassion I tried to extend to everyone else. And slowly, gradually, the anger faded. Not completely, I'm not sure it ever will. There's still a part of me that wishes he'd been braver, that he'd given me the letter in person, that we'd had even one honest conversation before he died. But alongside the anger, there's understanding, there's gratitude. I'm writing this now, almost a year after finding the letter. It's spring again, the season of returns. In my backyard, the cherry tree we planted when our daughter was born is in full bloom. Its branches heavy with pink flowers that will fall in a week, covering the ground like snow. I've been thinking about legacy, about what we pass down to our children, beyond genetics and money and the contents of our homes. We pass down our wounds, yes, but we also pass down our attempts at healing. My grandfather passed his emotional damage to my father. My father passed a different kind of damage to me, softened by his efforts to be better than his father had been. I pass something different still to my children, better in some ways, worse in others, but shaped by the intention to break cycles and build bridges. This morning, I wrote letters to my kids. Not final letters, I'm healthy, God willing I've got years left, but letters that say the things I want to make sure they know. How proud I am, how much I love them, how their existence has enriched my life in ways I can't quantify. How sorry I am for the ways I've failed them, because every parent fails their children in small and large ways. How I hope they'll forgive my shortcomings and remember my efforts. I'm not hiding these letters in books. I'm going to give them to my children directly, in person, so we can talk about what's in them, so they don't have to wait 14 years to know what I couldn't say out loud, so they can ask questions and I can try to answer them. Because that's what I learned from my father's letter. Saying something late is better than never saying it at all, but saying it now, while there's still time for dialogue and connection, is better than both. Last week, Emma and I drove up to Seattle and visited my father's grave for the first time in years. I brought the letter with me, along with a copy I'd made. I read it out loud there in the cemetery with the rain starting to fall, and then I told him all the things I'd never said when he was alive. I love you. I forgive you. I understand you better now. Thank you for trying, even when trying was hard. Thank you for the letter. Thank you for being brave enough to write it, even if you weren't brave enough to give it to me in person. I'm going to keep trying to be the father you wished you'd been. I'm going to keep trying to be the man you hoped I'd become. I'm going to tell my children I love them as often as I can, in as many ways as I can think of. A rain fell harder, soaking the paper, blurring the ink. But I kept reading until I reached the end, until I'd spoken every word he'd written into the air above his grave. It felt like completion, like closure, like the conversation we should have had 14 years ago, finally happening. Even if only one of us could speak. Emma held my hand the whole time. On the drive home, she said, "Do you think he knew? When he hid the letter? Do you think he knew you'd find it eventually?" "I think he hoped. I think he put it in that book knowing I might hold on to it, that I might open it someday. But I don't think he knew for sure. It was an act of faith then. I'd never thought of it that way, but she was right. In hiding that letter, my father had performed an act of faith. Faith that I'd find it, faith that I'd understand it, faith that even years too late, his words might matter." And they did. They do. That night, I took the letter out again and read it one more time. Then I carefully folded it, placed it in a frame, and hung it on the wall in my study. Not hidden, not tucked away, present and visible, a reminder of everything it taught me. My father built bridges for a living, strong, functional structures designed to last. In the end, the most important bridge he built was the one between us, a bridge made of words written at 3 a.m. Fueled by morphine and courage and love. It took me 14 years to cross it, but I'm here now, on the other side, and I can see clearly all the ways he tried to reach me when I wasn't looking. I understand now that the letter wasn't too late. It arrived exactly when I was ready to receive it, when I'd lived enough life to understand what he was trying to say, when I was old enough to see my father not as the man who raised me, but as a man raising a child, doing his best with the wounds he carried. Tomorrow I'll call my son. I'll call my daughter. I'll tell them I love them. Not because they've achieved anything, or because there's a special occasion, but just because it's true. Just because words spoken now are better than words written later. Just because I learned, too late, but not too late to matter, that the bravest thing we can do is tell the people we love that we love them. My father taught me that, not through his actions when he was alive, but through his words when he was dying. And maybe that's its own kind of grace. The possibility that we can keep teaching each other, even after we're gone. That love can build bridges across the divide between living and dead, between parent and child, between the words we say and the words we mean. A last letter my father wrote me changed everything, not because it absolved him, or because it erased the years of distance between us, but because it showed me that courage doesn't have a deadline, that it's never too late to tell someone you love them, that even our failures can teach the people who come after us how to succeed. And so I keep the letter on my wall, and I keep my father in my heart, and I keep trying to be brave enough to say the things that matter while there's still time to say them. That's the legacy I want to leave. Not perfect love, but honest love. Not flawless connection, but persistent effort. Not a life without mistakes, but a life where the mistakes mattered less than the attempts to make things right. My father gave me that. Finally, fully, 14 years too late, but somehow exactly on time.